And tonight we'll be joined by our two lovely librarians who share their research work on the trends and variety of Tamil and Malay advertisement from the National Library's collection. And two of our speakers for tonight are Nadira Noruddin, Associate Librarian with the Singapore Southeast Asian and Exhibitions Group. Our second speaker is Librarian Sundari Balasubramaniam. She has compiled 3 publications.
Okay, mine is advertisements from Tamil newspapers. You can ask, what is so big about advertisement? Advertisement is just like that. But I too was thinking like that. There's nothing much. When you see an advertisement, what do you see most? Okay, the product, okay. But only when I started researching for the exhibition and also for the stock and an article, I started reading between the lines. And I feel I get so many information from just one piece of advertisement. Each and everything talks about the culture, the economy, the lifestyle of the early days. And I was really surprised that I was able to gather so many information from just simple advertisements. For my research, I picked up 4 Tamil newspapers, one from 1887. It's called Singai Nesan. Then the other one, Podujana Mithiran, 1920s. Then Malay Mani and Tamil Murasu. Okay, this is from Singai Nesan. The first advertisement is about a bookshop. This is in 1887. And what is given in that bookshop is they are bringing in books. They buy books from India and other countries, but the language of the books, they were buying Tamil and Telugu books. Mainly they were very particular that they have Telugu and Tamil books. I was surprised because I was in a opinion that those days the migrants were mostly Tamils and of course Malayalis and some North Indians. But they cater for Telugu-speaking people. So it's a piece of information to me. Then the second one is bank transaction. In those days, like we have Western Union now, they had a similar type of transaction, which is called Undial, which is also a piece of information for me. So the transaction, like they give the money to someone here, but the money will be transferred to the people in India in their own amount. So the transaction name is Undial. And you can see the Undial rate is 224 and a half, whereas Java is $100. And even in different states, they have different values for the Singapore money. Then this one is a market price. In those days, all the advertisements were text-based. And they put in so many details into one single advertisement. Not like these days. If you want to read anything, you have to bring your magnifying glass and read. But those days, in one, they give as much information as they can. So this market price, they inform where the product comes from. That this sugar comes from China, this sugar comes from India, or that kind of thing. And I found the sugar from Java is quite pricey, expensive. So all these are information which are quite useful for researchers if they are researching, the 1800s, how the Singapore was in those days, the economy of Singapore in those days. Okay, this one is 1920 from Podujana Mithiran. The first one is insurance advertisement. As I told you, they give so many information in this insurance advertisement. Nowadays, if you see the insurance paper, what they are going to give, you can hardly read or you can hardly understand, because they use so much jargons. Whereas in this advertisement, they use very simple layman language, and they also say for what all things they compensate. For example, for fire, if the fire is due to neighbor dispute, if somebody burn your house, then they compensate. And also fire due to earthquake, for each and everything, they give all the details. It's very transparent, you see. If you see in these advertisements, the early newspapers, in Tamil advertisements, we can categorize into two main categories. One is health related. Mostly, about 70% of the advertisements were medicines, medical related. And then the next, 50% medical related, then the next 30% is hair oil. So many advertisements for hair oil and medicines. So the next one is one of the medicine. And in those days, I was surprised to see so many repeated advertisements for medicine equivalent to Viagra. I was surprised. I was really surprised. Again and again and again. That's why I picked up one. And in that one, they even explain how to apply it in detail. So, step by step, very clear. And another type of medicine is one pill or one medicine can cure 50 diseases. Like this one will cure blood pressure, nerve disorder, headache, heatiness, whatnot, everything. So many. So these are quite common in those days. Not like now, but mostly the medicines, like one medicine will cure 50 over diseases. Then in those days, all the clinics were called dispensary. I picked up this because luckily we had a picture in Picture SG, one of our databases. We had the Hinam and Little dispensary advertisement. At the same time, we had the picture also. So this was functioning in Northbridge Road. I think still it's functioning in Orchard Road because I managed to get the oral interview of the owner. Then the next one is Sincere Dispensary. That was functioning in Chulia Street. So these are some of the, just picked up because I got the picture from our Picture SG also. And those days even, like my colleague's mother used to say that she delivers her children in dispensary. So they don't call it hospital in those days, they call it as dispensary. Okay, this one is quite interesting. It's an Indian coffee shop. And I managed to get the picture also from our Picture SG database. This Indian coffee shop function in Tang Road. I come to know that now the Dandaidabani temple was called as Subaya temple in those days. The advertisement, the content of the explanation is, in those days, in early 1900s, caste system was prevalent among the Indians. It's a taboo at that time. So here what they advertise is, they prepare everything in an orthodox way, to cater to the high-class people. And also they provide lodging to, high-class people. That's why I picked up this, because it's something different. And I learned three things, like the name of the Dandaidapani temple was Subaya temple in those days, and there was a railway station at that time, at that place. And Tank Road, I heard that there used to be a tank, and the train used to take the tank to the hill close by. So now we don't see any of those things. Okay, this one is Malay money. I just picked up this because of the Tulet. You used to see this also in many of the older newspapers. This one, like in India, if I own a house, I want to rent a house, I'll put a to-let board. So same here, that space is empty, and they just want to advertise that the people can advertise in that space, so they put to-let. Okay, this one is, next we come to Tamil Murasu. Tamil Murasu is still our very own newspaper. And as I told you, most of the advertisements, they are oil related, hair oil related. And in those days, long hair considered to be very beautiful. Ladies should have long hair. Only then they are beautiful. If not, I've seen many, they used to use false hair and braid to have a long braid. I picked up this because the Kandarasam company was Singapore-owned company. It was functioning till 1955 or 56. After that, no more. And we have their product booklet, which list out all the products, many products, the products of that company. But their star product is this one, which if you take that medicine, you will become a macho man, and you can even tear the lion's mouth. And then a lot of Siddha medical clinics, that also quite common at that time, and also many Unani medical clinics. Now, I don't see any Unani medical clinics. This one is quite interesting. This is a trade show. Trade show, we see only now different types of trade shows in expos and everywhere, but this was picked up in 1937. 1937, they had this British trade show, and they have the advertising, that you'll get all the cosmetics from India. So that was quite surprising to me. In 1937, you had a trade show with all these products. Those days, I'm not sure whether they were so health conscious or they were misguided, but most of the advertisement for beer and wine, they advertise in such that it helps your health. I mean, it's very good for your health. See, in that picture, the wife brings a bottle of beer. Please drink, you'll become healthy. You know, that's that kind of advertisement. Even for wine also, they advertise like, if you drink this wine, the whole night you can dance. Kind of thing. And also, smoking was a fashion in those days. Like you can see here an Indian lady in sari, she smokes, and she say, I always use this brand because it's very smooth and very fragrant. So that's a kind of advertisement you see repeatedly also. Those days we had many Tamil libraries, especially catering for the Tamil community. But now we don't see any separate Tamil libraries in those days. And I've heard many of the writers, even one of our pioneer writers, P. Krishnan, he used to say that he honed his skill in Tamil language by going to these libraries and then interacting with the scholars there. So what I want to say this is, all these, I've gone through so many advertisements, how much of information we are picking up, you see. Even for one, that Indian coffee shop, in one glance you'll see, oh, it's an advertisement for Indian coffee shop. But for a researcher point of view, you see so many information like about the temple, the Tang Road, the railway station, and then about these newspapers, and then the lifestyle of those people, the fashion, what they eat, how they live, even whether they are rich or poor. You know, so many things we pick up from these advertisements. I learned to pick up all these only when I started researching for the exhibition. So hereafter, when you are seeing any advertisement, please open your third eye and then look deep into it so that you can get more information from just one advertisement. But nowadays, these days, I'm not sure about the advertisement because they are not so transparent as in those days. See, so many advertisements, they give so many information in the short, in the small piece of advertisement. But now we don't see that much. They try to hide behind. Even this, after 50 years, people will talk about this advertisement like it will become another piece of research tool. Last week, one of the patron, I think she's a writer. She wants to write a novel with a Singapore background in early 1930s. So what I told her was, you go to level 10 and go through the advertisements. And then don't just scan, you go in depth, you read each and every advertisement, then you will get to know how the people lived in those days. This will give you some ideas to bring up the Singapore in 1930s. You can clearly visualize that. For example, your character, you can patch all these information to your characters and bring them alive as though they are living in 1930s. So I told her to go and visit the level 10 advertisement exhibition first. So this is our newspaper database. You can use a keyword, or you want to see what are the newspapers, the digitized newspapers. You click here, and then you click on the newspaper titles. All these newspapers are digitized and OCR, except the Tamil newspaper. The Tamil newspaper, we have only 2, and they are in the PDF format. This is the Tamil version. I'm sorry, this is not OCR. This is a PDF image. So you have to go one by one. You cannot do a keyword search. Apart from this, we have all these lists in microfilms, plus these are the rest of the newspapers in microfilms. Don't expect we have the whole collection of the issues, but of each newspaper. Some we have few issues, some we have only one issues, but still these are our newspaper collections in microfilm, which are very useful for your research. Okay, thank you. Now I'll pass this mic to my colleague. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a very intimate session today for Librarians World. So my name is Nadirah and I'm an associate librarian with the Singapore Southeast Asia and Exhibitions. So I did some of the research on the Malay advertisements at level 10. So basically, just an overview that a lot of the advertisements, it's important to bear in mind that they were very telling of the aspiration, mindset, anxieties of the community at the time. But it was only a segment of the community. It cannot be generalized to include, the entire Malay community in that sense. And they were spread across pages of newspapers, magazines, periodicals, against a backdrop of other local, regional, and international events such as the World Wars, Great Depression, women's rights movements, and so on. So when we look at advertisements, we also need to see them in tandem with these other events. So, so these are some of the common advertisements at that time. So in the early years of publishing, we only see a lot of only major departmental stores such as Robinsons or theatre halls had the financial means to advertise in Malay newspapers and magazines. In earlier Malay newspapers, the mercantile interest, the majority of the readers were reflected in the publication of shipping movements, the commodity prices, and currency exchange rates, as well as the ads. So besides low print runs, low operational costs, and minimal human resources, ads were a strategy to have employed to finance themselves. But this was a much later development because you see one of the earliest newspapers, Jawi Peranakan, which was published in 1876. The newspaper was actually financed by business entities. And then later in the 1930s, you have Al Ahmadiyah Press. Al Ahmadiyah Press, if some of you may know, it was located at Sultan. It's now the boutique, the Sultan Hotel. Okay, so Al Ahmadiyah Press actually started out as an import-export goods company. And so then they had a publishing arm as well. So ads were not really important for them to maintain their businesses in a way. So this is an ad of Star Opera. As I mentioned before, in earlier newspapers, you have mostly departmental stores and also cinema halls and entertainment venues that were advertising in the magazines and newspapers and periodicals of the time. So in this Star Opera ad, it's very interesting because they were renowned Bangsawan theatre located at North Bridge Road. And the Star Opera ads were very, very common. And for this particular ad, it shows, it's giving you the show time and also as well as the storyline and brief synopsis of what you were going to expect or what kind of shows you were going to watch. So this ad, it says that the particular Bangsawan show will incorporate dance and an orchestra ensemble that would play Hindustan music or music Hindustan, which is in a way, Bollywood music essentially. So, and then you have all these other cinemas, and these are found in the Utusan Melayu, 1905 or so, yeah. So, if you notice that Gaiety Cinema, Harimau Hall, Empire Cinema, they were all located around Albert Street, Bencoolen Street, and North Bridge Road. So, there were plenty of entertainment options in this particular area, in this North Bridge Road area, yeah. So the availability of such opportunities through the publications of newspapers, magazines, and periodicals really provided more exposure for Malay businesses and the local entertainment industry to promote their goods and services. So just to give you a glimpse of the newspapers, magazines, and periodicals that I looked at, it's not limited to these, of course, but, I looked at plenty. So some examples are Mastika, Fashion, Hiburan. Some of you may be very familiar with these. Warta Malaya. I also looked at Lembaga Melayu, Majlis, Asmara, Majalah Film. So not all of them are available as physical copies. Some of them are also, I viewed them through microfilms. Okay. So from the 19th century, the Straits Settlements assumed the role of a literary and publication center for the Malay Muslim world due to the gradual spread of literacy and the growing use of printing technologies. Because of the technological, intellectual and social progress in these cities, the Straits Settlements churned out a welter of periodicals, newspapers and magazines. And a lot of the stories that you find in these publications are stories driven by Islam, political activism, and economic concerns. And it left an indelible imprint in the Southeast Asian region. So if you notice, these were the very common covers. So in Mastika in 1947, there was less illustration. It's just the designer, and then you start to see more models, and then you have one distraught guy there. So this will become very common. And in the Majalah Film, you see Sashi Kapoor, if any of you know. He's a very famous Bollywood actor. So it's very interesting to see, how diverse it was. They were not only covering Malay entertainment industry, but also especially Bollywood. You find Bollywood lyrics of Bollywood films, a lot of it there. Okay, so you're wondering, when is she ever going to talk about advertisements? So I'm not going to go into advertisements. So the appeal of the ads. And one thing I'd like to stress, basically, if you're wondering about circulation numbers, the highest recorded mainstays are by Utusan Melayu. Utusan Melayu had almost 25,000 copies daily issues. And then you have Hiburan. The highest weekly run or print run that they enjoyed was about 3,000 copies at any one time. But it's important to note that circulation numbers or circulation figures were not indicative of the literacy rates or were not indicative of the popularity of one publication over the other. Because a lot of the time, some of these magazines, they were passed from one person to the next, or the stories or the articles were read aloud. And in some instances, to the publishers that I've spoken to, they said that a lot of the magazines were actually unsold and returned back to them. So it does not really, circulation figures does not indicate how popular they were. So on to the ads. So between 1900s to the early 1930s, editorials and articles comprised a substantial portion of newspaper and magazine content, while advertisements were few and far between, because the editors, journalists, and publishing houses may not have recognized the importance of strong business foundation and a steady source of revenue for the long-term sustainability of their publications. So even if readership and circulation figures were sustained, they were often operating at a loss. So this is when advertisements started coming in by the 1920s. Publishers sought alternative ways to ensure that their publications were able to enjoy longer print runs. How can it be done? It could all be offset by advertising revenue. So as a result, publishers relooked into their business models and started courting local and sometimes international advertisers. So these are some of the common ads. And of course, some of you will then look at the Time for a Tiger one, because that's the favorite of everybody. When they look at Malay ads, the first thing they talk about, have you seen that Guinness Stout ads? Back then we had all these Tiger Beer ads, blah, blah, blah. So that's the common reaction we get from the Singapore Early Advertising Exhibition. Okay, so in the case of Warta Malaya, so Warta Malaya started in 1920s. So it was very rare to find full-page advertisements on Malay newspapers. But with Warta Malaya, you see advertisements even from the first page of the magazine and taking up that much space. So it's very important to also see then how Warta Malaya benefited from this. So staying competitive could also mean sacrificing editorial space for more advertisements. So when they undertook such a strategy, they observed a substantial increase in sales and profit margins. And in fact, Warta Malaya became the leading newspaper for almost a decade. So the rising profit margins also allowed them to decrease the prices of the newspapers. At one time, it was 10 cents, but later, by the late 1930s, it was 6 cents per copy. So then it was basically a process. It further increases circulation and readership over time. So other newspapers and magazines also followed suit. And what they did was they started featuring ads that were very specific to the needs of the Malay market. So you have some foreign companies who tried to appeal to the local market. What they did was they had all these advertisement copies of very stereotypical images of what a Malay person would experience in their day-to-day life. Compound houses, coconut trees, and then wearing sarong, and then this one wearing a blankon, and then after that this one enjoying wayang kulit performance. But interesting to see one of the figure is actually a European figure in the middle. So I wonder what the story is about. So just a background, Quaker Oats ads was actually the first breakfast cereal to be advertised in the US. So this, the first advertisements they had in the US was in 1882. It is not known when they started advertising in Singapore, but I do find it interesting that they tried their best to try to appeal to the Malay market by having such copies and also illustrations and characters and symbols to appeal to the market. Okay, so it's always marketed as a nutritious food and helps to promote overall well-being. Characters are often hardworking individuals that require a boost of energy, for the nursing mother, for the hardworking father, for the studious child. So these were some of the common tropes you find in the Quaker Oats ads. And what I find interesting is that these were ads that I found in Lembaga Melayu, and in the same issues of Lembaga Melayu, I found these buyer ads. So some of them, there was a cultural mismatch. So this is an interesting set of advertisements from Bayer. Bayer is a pharmaceutical company from Germany. And you see that when they were trying to advertise, they used Chinese characters and symbols in a Malay newspaper. And, as in contrast to the Quaker Oats ads, they were actually placed side by side. So I found that quite interesting to see, how one really tried to appeal to the Malay market, and another one basically just translated whatever they found in a Chinese ad and then, slap it on with some Jawi script, and then they advertise in Malay newspapers. So, very interesting to see, all these very Chinese sort of symbols and characters in the buyer ads. So they didn't make any effort, huh? And then, okay, so for this one, so what happened was the Great Depression. It kick-started an expanding consumerist culture amongst the Malay community by the 1930s because the products manufactured in Malaya were cheaper and more accessible than Western products. And these products include fragrances and health foods that acted as substitutes for their counterparts. So during the Great Depression, advertisements served as platforms for Malay consumers to support Malay enterprises in an effort to navigate the volatile economy. So advertisements played two vital roles. Previously, I mentioned how they helped to sustain the longevity of the circulation of the newspapers and magazines. But secondly, it also inculcated a sense of pride and identity through the active promotion of Malay-owned goods and services. So, as Sundari mentioned earlier, there were a lot of Unani medical halls that were advertised in Tamil newspapers, also in Malay newspapers, the Tabib Haji Mustafa Punjab Medical Hall, which is at Victoria Street. And then you have the soap ads. And then you have the nafsu besar, tenaga kurang. What do you do about that? So some of you who are not sure what it means is that you have a lot of appetite, but you don't have energy. So it has some sexual connotations to it also lah. So these were also very common ads. And I find it very interesting because when they were trying to sell soaps or food products, they always said dijamin halal, or made with halal products, or not using animal products. So back then they already had like vegan products as options. So another, these are also another interesting trend you find when we're trying to promote Malay-owned goods and services. They were also trying to appeal to the market by warning people from buying product duplicates or product dupes. So this one, is trying to say, don't buy the wrong version of this product. Make sure that you have the seal. Make sure that you have the sticker. So was it really to show that they were doing very well? Or was it just an advertising or marketing strategy to tell people that, look at us, we're doing so well that everybody wants to copy our product, So, I'm not really sure lah. That one, I'm not so sure. Okay, then there's the sarsaparilla tonic. And yeah, some of you might be familiar with the sarsaparilla tonic. So this one is very interesting. I've translated the copy. So it says that it's a tonic drink that is popular across the Malay Peninsula. It is loved by all ages. It cleanses the blood, it strengthens the muscles, it relieves stomach issues and many other afflictions. And it's especially good for post-pregnancy and keeps one trim. It warns consumers against buying fake versions in the market. So not only do you get a banging body, you will also be relieved of your diarrhea issues. So just like Sundari mentioned, they have all-in-one cures. You can, with one product, you can cure like 50 afflictions. So, these are very interesting things that you find. So, I don't think this will be approved in this day and age. One point I want to make about supporting local goods is that economic anxieties came along with rising immigration of Chinese and Indians to Malaya. So this also served as an impetus to the development of an entrepreneurial Malay class. And it was seen as a way to combat increasing competition from non-Malay companies and later international brands. And Malays who opened businesses in a time of economic depression therefore relied upon the community to keep them going. And at the same time, it also provides work for the unemployed individuals. So there was interdependency in the terms of supporting local or Malay businesses. The family was the focus for various advertisers by the 1900s, and children's and men's products were advertised in Utusan Melayu. It was very common. And this was the case after World War II as well. So products as varied as Planta margarine and Milkmaid and Nescafe were advertised to Malay families who were seen as key to buoying the economy. And Malay identity then assumed visual tropes in Malay advertisements and the magazines. And one such common trope was the nuclear family unit. The visibility in advertisements coincided with the post-war baby boom and the establishment of the HDB in 1960. So these were very common ads from the late 1950s onwards. And in this particular one, it's very interesting. It says Milkmaid dan Milo. So what it's trying to say, so Milo and Milkmaid actually combined forces at one time to advertise lah. So I think this is very interesting because it says that Milo is advertised as a nutritious drink for both health and in maintaining a trim figure. So presumably to appeal to the mother. And then it is also good for schoolgirls, specifically for young girls, for her cramps. And it's ideal for post-pregnancy and for a lean figure. You know, it's very repetitive. And then this one is the Klim ad here. You have the cow. The cow is kind of a mascot for Klim. It convinces the mom that this product is safe and healthy for kids and can act as a replacement for all types of milk. So you can add condensed milk and give it to your young child. So interesting. Okay. So as I mentioned, there were all these like Nescafe ads, Planta ads that were also very common that really shows the idea of a family. But a very stereotypical image of this family is, of course, the woman preparing the breakfast for the husband before he leaves for work, and then giving him the food will make him strong and healthy, and this is why you should feed your husband in the morning every day. So these are all very common typical things that you see lah. So for example, the Planta one with the ship, it says, my father is the captain of the ship, and he's able to overcome the strong erratic weather at sea. Maybe to appeal to the fathers who were sailors or something at that point lah. So and it's also interesting because in fine print it says certified halal meat with vegetable oils, best served with bread or biscuits. Okay. From the late 1940s to 1960s, there was an increase in international and luxury goods advertised in Malay newspapers and magazines. For example, new health and cosmetic products advocated to foreign notions of beauty or lifestyle. So the world economy was then starting to recover by the mid-1950s. International products regained their appeal again because of their superior functionality, their superior design, and competitive prices. So at the same time, with increased literacy and increased purchasing power from the community, consuming or owning these products was regarded as an indicator of your social status and also your refined tastes. Okay? And the above trend was likely due to several developments in Malay society, as I mentioned, heightened increase of health and wellness, increasing literacy, growing baby boomer industry. So the increased advertisements from advertisers allowed publishers to increase circulation. So there's always this pattern. When you see a particular magazine or newspaper having sacrificing more space for advertisements, you also start to see that they get more popular because now they're able to, popular in that sense because they're able to increase their circulation numbers. And this, for example, this pen advertisement, which I just found it interesting because it says it is made of 14-karat gold and it writes smoothly. It has a visually appealing design. So it's the significance of a pen in a Malay newspaper, and over and above being a pen, it's also a luxury pen, made of 14-karat gold. So who were they targeting? And was this an index of increasing literacy, education levels, purchasing power? So all these things. Okay. So, more international ads. So that one is the Roscorp watch that I found in a Malay newspaper, but also many of them appeared in Chinese newspapers as well, I think, yeah. And it says that it's sold at an exclusive price that will not be offered again. The authentic bronze watch is sold in a box with a piece of mirror and spring, and it's only $11.25. So out of curiosity, I went and looked it up on eBay and Amazon to see how much this is fetching at the moment. And it says that this model can snatch up to €300 now. And then for this one, it's a Shell advertisement. So it features all the 4 races, and this also coincided with the idea of Malayanization. And it's very interesting also because then they can just duplicate this advertisement across all the vernacular languages because they had all the representation they needed. They just needed to change the language. So yeah, so very representative. And then you have that Austin 50. It's a new model at that time. It's by Borneo Motors. They were the distributor. So it promoted the features and functions. They have 52-inch seats, luxe leather seats. So really to appeal to a certain market. But what I found interesting was that by 1960, about a year or two after this advertisement, they actually dropped their dealership Borneo Motors dropped their dealership with Austin Motors, and they changed it in favor of Toyota. So from the 1930s through the 1950s, women were at very at the forefront of numerous Malay magazines produced in Singapore and Malaya. The topic of women's fashion and commentary was pervasive across magazine content, including advertisements. So these developments were consistent with the increasing visibility of Malay women in the public sphere, in part due to the emerging local women's rights movements. So even if some advertisements continued to propagate stereotypical images of women, for the first time, advertisers and publishers noticed and appealed to the buying and decision-making power of women. So during the 1920s, Malay women were not the main target audience for publishers and advertisers. It could mainly be due to how the women in the community were perceived as not possessing the necessary purchasing power and influence. From the 1950s, however, rising literacy levels amongst Malay women and a vibrant post-war market led to a growth in female readership and increased purchasing power of Malay women. So I also found this interesting because these are Max Factor and Lux ads, which are international brands, but they're using Malay faces or Malay models, which you may not find in today's context. Max Factor would never hire, probably not hire an Asian face to promote, a good here. So it's very interesting. They were always using Malay models for these advertisements. So these are some interesting things to look at. And then for Ovaltine, for Ovaltine and Milo, the women were always playing sports, and it's also a common trope for Milo and Ovaltine. Always, people playing sports, and it gives you energy. And again, I stress on the sugar content of Ovaltine and Milo probably. So yeah, very interesting copies at that time. So actually, I'm coming to an end. I think I rushed it a bit, but anyway, to wrap up, ads was one of the short-term strategy for publishers of 20th century Malaya to sustain their businesses. But over time, there were censorship issues, licensing problems, and decreasing interest, which led to its eventual decline. So the printing and publishing industry, the Malay printing and publishing industry was very active, was very strong and dynamic from the 19th century to the early 20th century. But by the mid-20th century, there were all of these other issues that came about that led to its eventual decline. Okay, thank you very much.
I have two questions. One is, when did the publications move from Jawi script to Malay script for mainstream publications? And number two is, I was surprised to see that even 1910, 1920s, those early days, the advertisement has 3 languages on it. There's Jawi, then the address will be in English, and sometimes there will be in Romanized Malay. So that is, I guess, indicates a lot of sophistication on the readership side, that they can actually read in so many languages at that time. And is that something indicative of the period? Yeah.
So you start to see more Romanized magazines by the late 1950s, but it became more standardized by the late 1960s, where a lot of the entertainment magazines were already publishing in Romanized Malay. So you have Bintang Film, Majalah Film, Arena Film. They were all already publishing in Romanized Malay by the late 1960s, because there was more, because of the whole, use of Romanized Malay over Jawi script by the late 1950s, but more common by 1960s. And when you talk about the different languages in one ad copy, that's interesting, but it's also common in the Chinese and Tamil newspapers as well, where addresses are usually in Romanized form. So, but I think less so for Chinese newspapers, but Tamil newspapers, sometimes the addresses are not in Tamil script, right? So, not so sure about the reason for that.
I was curious about the adaptations from Western brands, like the Quaker Oats one. So were the visual elements taken from English version, and did you? It would be good if you had juxtaposed the English one and how they extract the visual, and do they hand draw it again for the Malay newspaper?
Yeah, that's the case for some of the advertisements. But when it's very much specific to cater to the Malay market, then you start to see the changes and differences, like the Quaker Oats. Yeah, done from the original. Yeah, so yeah, they do their own copies because they had their own artists and stuff. But for majority, I can say for majority of the ads, they were mainly just illustrations from the mostly English ones, and then they just have a different copy for the Malay ones. Yeah, and of course for the Malay owned goods and services, they were original copies of the Malay advertising agencies.
We have a lady at the back there.
Was there like a drastic change between just text and between the illustrations? Like, how fast did the uptake of illustrations come in the ads?
Yeah, so because my focus today is 20th century, so by 20th century, especially in the 1920s onwards, you start to see more illustrations and designs incorporated into the advertisement copies. But in the 19th century ads, especially in Jawi Peranakan, and then you have Sekolah Melayu, and a few others, they were mostly just texts. And even when you look at the newspapers, you would think that they were actually articles because they just look like any text. And especially when it's in Jawi, you tend to gloss over them, thinking that they're not even advertisements. So like Sundari mentioned also for Tamil newspapers, that was also a trend where a lot of them were just, text, and you really have to look at it properly to realize that they were selling a product. So yeah.
We have a gentleman there.
It took me down memory lane for a while, looking at all these advertisements. But then looking at all the illustrations and words that come along with advertisements, the illustrations actually don't picture what the information actually tells. It's totally something different. From milkmaid and Milo to a baby or drinking milk, it's quite difficult to understand these advertisements. But I think for those days, they wanted to just sell off the product. And the best way to do it was to write something that is truthful. But I think advertisements nowadays are very fake. Those days were very truthful. No doubt, if you look at the health side of it, it may be bad. But for those days, those times, I think that was the norm. I think probably we have to understand it that way. It's really very nostalgic going through this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and sharing your experience.
Thing is that the Malay group itself isn't homogenous, so you've got different groups like the Japanese, the Balinese, the Burgunese people. So I was just wondering whether there was a certain time where there were adverts that catered to these different groups that wrote in different scripts. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of scripts, no, I've not seen any that wrote in specific scripts. They were all in Jawi or even sometimes Romanized Malay. And there's not any targeted advertisements. I mean, from what I've seen, from what I've combed through for the exhibition at least, I've not seen any advertisements that was very specific to the sub-ethnic Malay groups. So, yeah. And regarding your comment earlier about, the advertisement and the copies, actually what's interesting is that I've also seen some Horlicks advertisements that I did not manage to show here. It was actually a comic strip. It was in comic strip form, and it actually continued from day to day. So you actually have to follow the advertisement. So it's kind of to sell the product, but also to make you buy the newspaper. So you buy each copy and see the continuation of the story. So these were some very interesting advertising strategies they employed as well. So very different from advertisements that we see today. Yeah.
Thanks to the two presenters. I was just curious, upstairs on the exhibition, there was excellent advertisements from Straits Times Annual. I know in Tamil newspaper, you have Tamil Muranasu, annual. How about the Malay newspapers or magazines? Do they have an annual?
So to my knowledge, we don't have annuals, but in our collection, we also have microfilms of a lot of the issues. It's mostly for magazines. So, for example, Utusan Melayu did produce like I think 20 years or something. Yeah, Utusan Melayu had, but it looks kind of like a magazine, so it's just like this thick. Yeah, Utusan Melayu has one. Yeah, a commemorative issue sort of. Yeah.
So on that note, please thank our two speakers, Nadira and Sundari.